no one knows anything about this. See, we just
No.
don't know what's going on. So, whatever.
So what's the way we should talk about this? How do you want to do this?
I mean, I'm interested in this, from so many entry points. I think the context of this year is really interesting, and just the idea of like representation in general and vote by mail and the various aspects. But I know that this is really. I know that the Electoral College has been something that has been perplexing regular people forever. The idea that certain states have more weight but don't have more population, and the non-correspondence of sort of the essentially undemocratic nature of that, I think has really confused everyone I know, and really lent a lot of credence, seemingly, to the idea that things are rigged and that things are fixed. And I think that one of the most important aspects of a democracy, really the most important aspect of any operation that involves multiple people, is trust in each other, trust in the process, trust in the premise. And when you have something looming that's just inherently undemocratic and counter to the very premise of the democratic process, at least in the sort of pedestrian eye, and I think also in the scholastic eye. I mean, I think numerically, mathematically, it's just not making sense. So it ends up creating distrust, and you end up with this widespread sense that everything's fixed, and I think that that's really detrimental. So yeah, I don't know. I know this is something you've been thinking about and working on forever. So, I mean, I'd bow to you and let you lead, but yeah.
Well, I think that, the slogan on your t-shirt kind of captures it all. I mean, we have this fraudulent system of democracy because it's not democratic in the sense that everybody is not equal as citizens inside this democracy. So the Electoral College is one issue, and we'll talk about that because I think that's a focus of what we've been working on recently. But it's not just the Electoral College. Think about gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Explicitly drawing districts to give some people more power than other people. Or think about the way votes get suppressed by these ID requirements or people being thrown off the voting rolls, mainly for partisan reasons, maybe also racial reasons. But you look at, Georgia, where Stacey Abrams certainly won that election. If it weren't for the explicit efforts by, the governor, the now governor, the then Secretary of State, to suppress her vote.
Yeah.
Or money in politics. We have a system where members of Congress spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money, just on the phone, calling people to raise money. Well, the 100,000 people they're calling have enormous power inside of our system, but the ordinary person, the people not being called by these congressmen, don't. These are all ways in which the core promise of a representative democracy, that people get represented equally, has times really intentionally, but that violation, I think you put it really well. It makes it hard to trust the system. Why would you trust the system? The system has been rigged to make it so a tiny minority can control what happens, and surprise, surprise, they have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all these little incremental efforts to sort of undermine the democratic process. Not that it needed any help being undermined, given, from whence we came. The documents were sort of in order, but the realization and reification of those documents has we're just like slowly scrambling to realize our promise. But it's that slow scramble towards sort of equality, political equality, is being so readily undermined. And it's really difficult now with these, I mean, redlining and gerrymandering is like, there's no, it's on its face. There's really, it's indefensible. But then you have things like voter suppression where, you know, it's like, well, but what about voter fraud? There's all these, you know, so they have these voter fraud arguments. For instance, I think this year, vote by mail being like an open, anybody can vote by mail in every state. The idea that that is being suppressed in a time of coronavirus is really troubling. And yeah, you have all of these, you know, and not to mention, you know, like the winner take all system, you know, and the the impossibility of a third party or, you know, like a ranked choice voting thing or anything that's like, you know, allows in other ideas. Um, yeah, the cards are very stacked against us. Yeah, against democracy, I should say. You know.
Yeah, and a huge part of it is that we have a media infrastructure that allows people to get away with bullshit. So, you know, like the Attorney
Yes.
General has become very motivated to stop the spread of vote by mail. Now, I think that's bullshit and the reasons against it are wrong. But what's so astonishing is the way he gets away with just total bullshit, right? So the Attorney General went on an interview and said the problem with vote by mail is that people can vote multiple times, or you can have foreign countries that print up ballots and then send them in. Now, he knows, as much as anybody knows, that every single one of those ballots is barcoded. You know exactly whether it's an authentic ballot or not, and that when it comes in, it's validated. And the chance of people sending in multiple ballots is exactly zero. It just can't happen. And yet he gets on Fox News and he tells this story. And of course, the sycophants at Fox News have no backbone to say to him, hey, you know that's bullshit, just like we know that's bullshit. And so the consequence of it is that you have, you know, 40% of the American public who genuinely believes that this is a system designed to make it so the Chinese can pick the next president. And oh, by the way, if they were, they would pick Donald Trump because he's such a tool for the Chinese. But, you know, the idea is not just that we have a rigged system. It's that we don't even have a democratic discussion about it where we all even know the same facts. We can't even talk about it understanding the same story because we've been so polarized and made partisan by this, you know, media infrastructure that profits from the politics of hate that they play so effectively.
Yeah, I think that really hits the at the heart of the current dilemma, which is the polarization in a lot of ways from, you know, just the available data. The polarization is somewhat decoupled from individuals' views on issues. The polarization is sort of like, you know, it's become like a game of football. It's like, you know, you have your team and you recognize their colors and you cheer, you chant their song, but at the end of the day, you do love basketball or football or whatever the sport is. You appreciate the jump shot, you appreciate the three-pointer, but we're not. And those are the issues. Like, you know, you care about your kids, you care about healthcare, you care about these things, but you can't see those issues without seeing your version of what you care about as associated with your colors. The polarization is basically a trick. And I don't know how we necessarily get out of it because of the media echo chamber, the Facebooking of our lives, the siloing of our worlds. There's very little room because the rhetoric has been so distilled and concretized so that, like, you know, you cannot bring up words. I mean, I try and just avoid words like liberal, progressive ideas. Like, those are entirely unhelpful in trying to convince anyone else to see, you know, the bright side of a particular issue. And, you know, once we can get rid of the labels and just talk about the issues and have conversations, like I guess you guys are doing, you end up realizing that we have more in common. But to, you know, at this point, that sentiment that, like, well, in reality we all have more is becoming almost like this, like, meme of itself that's like almost impotent now. You know, like, people know that we all have everything in common, but I don't know if anyone cares. It's just so fun to hate the other side, this negative partisanship thing. I think there's a lot of truth to it. I think there's a lot of truth to the idea that people are no longer really for things as much as they are really against other things.
It's so much easier to hate. It's such a visceral, sort of reptilian act just to hate. And we're fed it, we're triggered for it. But I think that the opportunity is if you can get people in contexts where they're not being triggered like that, where they're like brought together and they're asked, let's talk about this issue, not as Democrats or Republicans or, people from red states or people from blue states, but just as Americans. What we found is that you can get people to get out of it and you can get them to engage with it. So we're doing this project around the Electoral College, which is, I think one of the core flaws of our current system of representative democracy, where we're basically walking people through in these virtual conventions, like maybe 100 people at a time. We'll be deliberating on like 4 questions about the college. It's called fixthecollege.us. And the questions are basically designed to reveal, because we've done the work to demonstrate that this is in fact true, that there's a very important agreement among people about how the college could be changed. I mean, the simple framing that came out in this last presidential election, where people are like, let's abolish the college. That would be my first choice. But the reality is, in America, where it takes 3/4 of the states to amend the Constitution, or we have to get something like the National Popular Vote Compact through, which has been very hard, that's not obviously going to happen anytime soon. So the question is there a change that could give us 95% of what we want, but that we could get 80% of America to agree with? And what we found is if you work people through these questions, they come in the end to actually agree with a reform that could actually make sense and be an effective change that would get us a president who cared about all of America, not just on these states that happen to have really important power. But it's about getting people out of the echo chambers of cable news or their Facebook news feed, and into a place where they realize they got to work with other people, and those people are not necessarily like them.
Yeah. What would be the I'm curious. So if I lived in Montana and I'm a conservative and I know that my vote counts 4 times as much as anyone in California, but that's a liberal state and I don't like liberals. So I'm actually okay with having my vote count for more. What's my incentive? Let me first ask this question because I'm ignorant. Would the change have to happen on a state-by-state legislative level, or is it a federal?
Well, it could happen state by state, but what we're looking for is an amendment. In the end, I mean, it might be national popular vote wins, but if it doesn't, we're looking for an amendment to change the Constitution. But that question, why would Montana want it, given all the power that Montana has, is exactly the right question. Because the idea that Montana has power because it's a small state turns out to be total bullshit, just not true. Because the reality is presidential candidates care only about swing states, not small states. And they care about swing states because of what you mentioned before, winner take all. So if you're running a campaign for president and you're a Republican, you're not going to spend a second or a dime in Montana because you won Montana. And you're not going to spend a second or a dime in California because you've lost California. So California and Montana don't matter to you. The states that matter to you are states like Pennsylvania or Florida or Wisconsin or Michigan, swing states that could go one way or the other. And so those states are the states that have enormous power in our current political system because presidents bend over backwards to make those states happy. We have insane policies in America because of swing states. So, we subsidize ethanol production, which is like one of the worst greenhouse gas disasters that there is. Why? Because Iowa is a swing state. Or we have tariffs on steel. Why do we have tariffs on steel? Because Pennsylvania is a swing state. So the point is, you've got these stupid policies because these few states have enormous power. But they have power not because the Constitution doesn't say that winner take all is the rule, right? Winner take all says that if you win the vote in a state, you get all the electors in that state. That's not in the Constitution. That's just what states have done. And what that means is we have a system where we've kind of outsourced the selection of our president to the swing states. So swing state America picks our president. But the swing states, in 2016, there were 14 swing states that got 99% of campaign spending. This cycle, people think it could be as little as 9 states that get all of the spending. The point is, those 9 states, they like this system, maybe. I would think they would hate the television ads, but anyway, they might like this system because they benefit. But the point is, the vast majority, in fact, more than 3/4 of the nation doesn't benefit. So Montana and California both should hate this system. Kentucky and Louisiana should hate this system. Texas, New York should hate this system. And when you begin to look at all the states that should hate this system, begin to have a way to think about building a coalition of the vast majority of America who actually could like an alternative. And the alternative is easy to think about. Like, the alternative would be to say, instead of allocating all the electors to the winner of the popular vote, just make it proportional at a fractional level. So you could get 1.45 electors out of Montana as a Democrat winning 45% of the vote. And so the point is, if you did it like that, then presidents would care about every state. They'd want to get a vote in every state. They'd worry about Montana and they'd worry about California, because more votes, more electoral votes. And that change would so fundamentally change the way the president gets elected. And it's something that the vast majority of people should like, whether you're Republican or Democrat. That's what we think is the great hope here.
So this is the change to the Electoral College that you guys are suggesting is actually that it would end up, the Electoral College would be proportional.
Yeah, I think of that as a second best change. Again, my first best change is national popular vote. But if we can't get national popular vote, second best change, make it proportional.
Yeah.
And if you make it proportional, still somebody will say that the small states have proportionally more power than the big states. But the great opportunity we have at this moment is, if you take the bottom 10 states, half of them are red and half of them are blue. The smallest 10 states, 5 red, 5 blue. So even though small states get an advantage, the advantage they get is not partisan. It's not a partisan advantage to one side or the other. So, okay, we're kind of stuck with the system where small states have more weight in their vote, but if it doesn't matter in a partisan way, then maybe we can live with that compromise. If we at least get a system where Montana matters and California matters and New York matters and Louisiana matters to the election of the president.
Yeah, hopefully that's a conversation that makes sense to people. I mean, the idea that, I'm trying to think of the other, the other realms of life in which, proportional wins, exist. I know they don't really exist in the sports world, but just trying to convince someone in a really sort of pedestrian way, proportional representation in a much more concrete way is what they have in the UK, right? I mean, essentially Parliament is entirely proportional.
Right. It's a dangerous word because, at least among political science geeks, it triggers a different set of associations. So what we're talking about is not proportional representation in Congress, even if, I think that would be a great innovation to try too, but that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, all we're talking about is a very intuitive sense. Like if you're a Republican in California, in 2016, 45% of Californian voters voted for Donald Trump. They got 0 electoral votes in the Electoral College. And you say, and they should say, what the hell? Like, why do we represent 45% of the state but get no votes in the Electoral College? Now, we've been actually, over the last 4 years, litigating this question. In 4 states, 2 red states, 2 blue states. So California and Massachusetts, we have Republican plaintiffs who are like, we vote and it never matters. And then Texas and South Carolina, we had Democratic plaintiffs who said, we vote and it never matters. And literally yesterday, we had a decision in the 4th Circuit, so that's in South Carolina, where, for the first time, a judge, one of the judges, unfortunately not a majority, but still one really great judge, wrote an opinion where they said, this is just not democratic. You know, you can't have a system where if 45% of the people vote for one candidate, they get no electors in the electoral college. And if you say to people, why shouldn't you get at least the proportion that's represented in your state? I don't know anybody who has a good reason not to do it like that. It's just, that's not the way we've done it. So, okay, that's a reason, but not a good reason. Let's think of a good reason. And if you changed it and you made it proportional, then presidents would care about every part of this country.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So is the process creating sort of like pressure in courtrooms by litigation and running it up to the Supreme Court, or is it massive, you know, getting people to suddenly care about democracy and like a giant wave of interest in, you know, I don't know, in democracy at large? Or?
Well, there's a lot of that. So, you know, groups like Represent Us have been doing extraordinary jobs at the state level to get people engaged about democracy questions. You know, the problem with the Electoral College is it's an issue that comes up every 4 years and then people forget about it. So what we've been doing is trying to find ways to surface or elevate the issue in the kind of off season so that people pay more attention to it. You know, the litigation is extremely important, and I think the Supreme Court should step in. But I've kind of begun to lose faith in, you know, the courts doing much good here. So it's really the democratic process. So the project that we've started, that I hope in the fall that will really kick in full force, the fixthecollege.us, is trying to build, you know, tens of thousands of people who've gone through this process of reflecting on, you know, the questions of what's wrong with the college and what would fix it. And if out of the 10,000, we could get 80% of them to react the way you have, to say, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Why not? I mean, maybe our first best solution is national popular vote, but this is a really good second best solution. And that those people are not just like you, but, you know, they're black and white, and they're conservative and liberal, and they're rural and they're urban. They're all sorts of people, young and old. Then we begin to have a basis to go to the politicians and say, look, here's a solution that the vast majority of Americans agree with and would actually make the system a much better system. So why don't you amend the Constitution to do it? Now, it's a hard fight to get an amendment to the Constitution. But the reality is, if you're fighting for something where objectively more than 3/4 of the states would benefit from the change, why not? I mean, you know, why wouldn't they do it? And so I think this is a process that could, in the end, build a strong enough movement to make that change happen. But we're at the stage right now of just building the understanding, so people come around to say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense and we should do it.
Yeah, it's fun. I like the idea that it also is a movement that inherently involves both sides. You got to engage the Republicans in California and the Democrats in Texas, and you know, it's this very flip-floppy inversion of typical politics. And in some ways, it feels very unifying to me. You know. Like a lowest common denominator of experience in having your vote just not fucking matter. And I think we all can sort of admit that that's just totally wrong. You know, and also I think, you know, it's not lost on all of like I'm in Louisiana, it's not lost on anyone in a non-swing state that our states don't matter. And then in a lot of ways your vote doesn't matter, and you almost should, you know, with the exception of local elections, you might as well not show up. You know what I mean? But like, there's state elections and there's bills and there's, you know, so many other aspects that are important to vote on. But on the federal level for president, it becomes very disheartening because you just feel like it's all cooked. And I think that's something that everybody feels. And if it's not like some QAnon conspiracy to feel that way, it's like hard and straight facts of like, well, the Electoral College and the general premise of everything indicate that like my vote for president is going to have very little effect. And I hear that from everybody who decides not to vote, who eschews the idea of like state, you know, the importance of various other state ballots and ballot initiatives and really important aspects that they just maybe are unaware of. But on the presidential level, their argument is not unsolid. And that's really sad to care about democracy myself and not have a really great counter argument for people who are disillusioned.
Yeah, no, it's not just the presidential level. I mean, that's what we were saying before. It's every single level. You live in a gerrymandered state, you know,
Right.
which practically every state is. It doesn't
Right.
matter there either.
Right.
Money in politics, you know, if you're not giving $50 million to the Democratic Party, then it doesn't matter either. I mean, the point is every single level that's true. We've got to find a way to like get people, you know, instead of, as you say, eschewing politics, to turn to like reform politics, to say whatever I care about, you know, I have strong views on climate change and healthcare and minimum wage and labor unions, but all of those things are irrelevant until we fix this first corruption issue, right? That's the thing we got to fix. We got to get a representative democracy.
Yeah, I think and I think that speaks to, I think once you get trust, I think you're right. And I think it's the core issue. I think whatever issue you can identify, or that we can all identify as the core issue that's disrupting our trust in the process. And I think in this case, like, yes, money in politics, but some of those things are sort of abstract in the mind of, you know, of a person, and hard to sort of cordon together into a single bill or a single idea. I mean, you know, well, I mean, you could take all money out of, you know, elections, but it's difficult. But I think that the Electoral College is something that is really at the core. It's like, okay, wait a minute. So we all vote, and then the vote doesn't matter. Like, wow. By the way, speaking of the Electoral College, is what aspect of that Electoral College isn't the Electoral College can, if it so chooses, decide not to reflect the vote of its state. Isn't that correct?
Well, it used to, I mean, you know, we had just had a case in the Supreme Court that resolved this. We were involved in that case. So it used to be the case that people believed electors could choose to vote however they wanted, whatever the state said. The Supreme Court's basically said that states now can control their electors, so they can override that. But the states themselves, the state legislature, still gets to pick the electors, or still has the power to pick the electors. So, you know, one of the scary scenarios for 2020, you know, imagine the pandemic comes back full force, and unsurprisingly, we're not ready for it. So in the fall, things are really horrible. And, you know, the governor of Florida says it's not safe. We shouldn't have an election. So instead of us having an election in Florida, we'll just have the legislature pick their electors for the Electoral College. And they cancel the election. They select a slate of Republican electors. That, under our system, at least so far, the Supreme Court's not questioned that, is perfectly constitutional. And so you could actually have a system where, you know, it's the legislature who's picking the president. You know,
oh my God.
Talk about losing.
So we're back to the Roman Senate.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you know, it's really been, you know, talk about, I mean, I don't know, you know, you know the Constitution better than I, so I'm not sure if you've been surprised or not surprised, but it's been really interesting for me, a learning process, to see how much of the Constitution is legal that is also rather tyrannical. Like, well, he can do that. It was just that other presidents decided not to do it as sort of like a method of decorum or just for, you know, in good spirit. But yes, he can do this, and he can fire this guy, and he can do that, he can replace this. It's all perfectly legal. And I'm almost thinking, well, then the Constitution needs to change, because it's basically legal to be a despot. This is bizarre. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying is really interesting. So it's perfectly legal at the moment for the Electoral College for the states to close elections because of safety concerns, and then for the Electoral College simply to just do what they want.
Yeah, that would be legal. And I mean, you know, people would fight it. But I think the more important thing is, would that inspire the people you say who eschew politics to turn around and say, you know, what the hell? Okay, that's
sure.
Enough. That crosses.
Sure, maybe that's the worst case scenario. Maybe that's our bottom. Maybe maybe we still need to go further down, you know?
Oh, can't imagine we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's an aspect of the Electoral College. I mean, obviously that would be a part of the reform. right? Or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
that
absolutely. I mean, you basically require elections. You basically say each state gets a certain number of electoral votes. And then those electoral votes get allocated proportionally. That's what you
yeah, and
do.
they would have to be reflective of the vote. They couldn't
Yeah,
necessarily deviate if they wanted to.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
I think that deviation part is that's sort of the folkloric aspect that like a lot of people out here like that don't know much about the politics will talk about. Like, you know, the fact that the electoral college can just pick whomever they want, that's become sort of folklore.
Yeah.
And that's the part that really creates distrust in people, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that part's gone away, but we'll see if the other parts
Yeah.
continue to foment distrust. But
Cool.
I hope you can help us spread the idea of
For
this
sure. Yeah. I
college.us.
mean, I'm all about it. I, you know, I'm looking for ways right now because I've had, I think that you're right to focus on a specific issue that has to do with sort of democratizing democracy. I was trying with proxy vote to simply democratize democracy across the board, have people like more direct democracy, direct control of you know, bills and issues and whatnot. But at large, at scale, it was too much, I think, for people to talk about. It was easy to get politicians on board and can commit to actually listen to their constituency, but to get the constituency to care about democracy in quotation marks was really difficult, actually. It was disheartening. But I learned a lesson, which is that people care about issues. And if we can make this issue of democratizing democracy an issue that people are talking about, that they understand that there's actually a path forward, that there's something we can do about this, that this isn't just a talking. I mean, I'm really glad that some of our presidential candidates on the, you know, on the Democratic side have been really vocal in talking about dismantling the electoral college. That's really been helpful, I think, because it's good for people to hear that, like, oh, so some of the people in charge actually think that this should happen. And I think that we can make this a real issue. So I'm 100% on board. I think that this is really important. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is great. I think I'm losing my internet connection for some reason.
Or I am, I don't know.
Okay, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking time to do this. And
thank you. Yeah, let me know how I can be of service and you know, spreading the message and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, well, what you're spreading it is going to be the most important way that we get people in. So I'm really, really hopeful that we can do something together.
So the whole project is called
Fix the College.
Fix the college.us. Yeah. Great. Yeah. And the reform, does the reform itself have, oh, well, you're still in the process of forming the reform, but Fix the College. Yeah, great. Fix the College.
Okay, so you disappeared.
Oh, I disappeared?
Yep, we're just starting with it. Now you're back.
Maybe this is better. Anyway.
Okay.
You got me back?
I got you back.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So yes, we started with Fix the College, and then at the end of 6 months of talking through this, we hope that we have the proposal that we can take to the Hill and get them to push it.
Great. Great. Yeah. Where's Biden on this issue, by the way? I mean, not that it necessarily matters what issue he's deciding is good for the people or not. But has he spoken on the Electoral College?
He's not, so far as I know, he's not come out to call for the abolishment of the Electoral College.
Yeah.
But I think it's not likely something he would want to do, because right now he's just trying to focus on building a large coalition.
It's not part of his platform, though.
No, it's not. But we don't need him. In fact, he might actually hurt it, because we don't want it to be a partisan thing. We want it to be something that kind of grows up from the people. So that's the stage we're at now.
Amazing. All right. Well, I'll be in touch with me, and I'll be keeping my eye out for how I can support.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks a lot, Alex. It's
Thanks, Larry.
It's a great honor to be able to talk to you about this.
Oh, very much so. The same. Thanks, man.
Okay. All right.
All right. Cheers, guys.
Bye.